Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeVias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Dan Florness to the Reboot Chronicles, the president and CEO of Fortune 500 leader Fastenal. Founded in 1967, Fastenal provides a vast array of industrial supplies, supply chain logistics, consulting services to manufacturing, construction, state and local government sectors, just to name a few, I'm sure. You know, not many leaders can say they've been at the same company for 30 years. I know I can't, but and they've also been an active rebooter of the company along the way, taking it from a very small supplier, in this case up in northern Minnesota, to a global market leader. And that's why Dan's here today. He and his teams have grown the company to 3,400 locations in 25 countries with 23,000 employees who've delivered over $7 billion in revenue last year alone. Dan, it's good to see you.
Good morning, Dean. Good to see you.
Man, you've got some history. It's amazing, you know, we used to be a company as this long. And so over 30 years, you've been through probably a lot of reboots. And how did you go from this little tiny supplier to this multinational Fortune 500 leader that's pretty much on a tear to, in my estimation, to double your size in the next X amount of years?
Yeah, you know, the best way I can frame it up is we've been really good at searching out and finding great people, usually early in their career, but great people looking for an opportunity, and we ask them to join. And what we try to do every day is give them a reason to stay. You know, sometimes the reasons are how you treat each other. Sometimes the reasons are, hey, I'm challenging and I'm growing because I'm part of this family, I'm part of this organization.
Right.
And the other one is, what are the opportunities we create for people? And quite frankly, usually means they're creating them for themselves, but we're doing it together. And we have really good longevity with employees.
So critical. It's, you know, we teach the people, platform, passion model, just three components of not just a good, you know, ongoing entity, multi-billion dollars, but also how you kind of reboot it to the next level and the next level. And looking back, what do you think were the big inflection points for you?
So as you mentioned, we started back in 67. In the late 80s, we went public. We were a $20 million company with, I think we had about 50 locations, and we had around 400 employees.
It's tiny.
And, you know, that's not a company that goes public today.
No,
it's too small.
Too risky.
But
so that's when you went public, those were your metrics?
Yeah.
Wow.
20 million in revenue, 400 people, and 50 locations, mostly in the upper Midwest. You know, think of states that touch the Great Lakes, and that's kind of how we grew. Started in Minnesota and just wrapped around the Great Lakes.
Yeah, safe territory, right?
Yeah, and our founder was not a fan of taking on debt. You know, he was he'd grown up with parents that had endured the Great Depression, and he liked to kind of pay as you go along. But a distribution business is a working capital business, and the faster you grow, the more cash it takes. And so as we got into the later 80s, the business had a need for a little more cash. Our growth was quite strong. The second piece was it was complicated if you wanted to allow ownership from within your employee base.
Right.
And going public allowed for that. And then the five founders of the organization were very charitable, and it unlocked some of their investment to do some charitable giving. Because it wasn't about for them having a different lifestyle. They had the lifestyle they wanted, but there was things they wanted to do. And those things coalesced in the late 80s. We went public. And as we moved into the 90s, we really saw first and foremost that we had the prospect to be the largest fastener distributor in North America, in the United States, because we were completely in the U.S. at that. We entered Canada in around the 94 timeframe. And but we just kept going out, dropping a new location in a market, asking somebody to move into that market, maybe from an hour away, and then hiring folks locally, and just kept growing the business. And But you know, a lot of the reinvention that occurred as we moved on was customers are asking us for more stuff.
Yeah.
And we operated a very decentralized model. Our product development throughout the history of the company has been a balance of customers asking for stuff and our local teams sourcing it. We do a lot of sourcing at the local level, which is atypical for a national distributor. And we discover success that way.
And most distributors, they kind of stay in their wheelhouse, especially masters. And but do you also manufacture some things, or did you stay pretty much on the sourcing side?
We manufacture on the fastener side. We manufacture about 9% of what we sell, and it's custom. We have a machining division, we have a cold heading business unit. So a customer, if they can get us a spec on something, oftentimes when we were sourcing stuff, we'd go to a machine shop and get it built for them. And the problem is sometimes the machine shop couldn't get it done fast enough, or if they called you up and said, "Well, we're running behind," it became our issue to fix. And so we figured, let's fix it. So in the early '80s, we bought a few pieces of equipment and started machining some product and bending some product, and that has formed into the manufacturing capabilities we have today, which are global in scale.
Yeah, that's why I've always been a fan of your company. Very under noticed category, of course, but it's extremely global. I think you've got 240 district managers who are large and in charge. They're kind of running their own geographies. So you've kept that entrepreneurial culture. People doing that over $1 billion in revenue is tough. You're on your way to 10 billion and still doing it. That is so rare in not just corporate America, but in the global 1000. You just don't see that anymore. Besides taking care of people, what other things do you think is your secret sauce? Because even some of your competitors, they have branches, they're local, but they're probably more of a command and control operation than you. Seem a little bit more of a benevolent dictator, as we used to call one of my bosses.
I think it's a case of we not only allow people to make decisions locally, we challenge them to make decisions locally, and because that's part of their success, and because in Winona, Minnesota, I don't know what a customer needs in Northern Florida. I don't know what a customer needs in Southern California. Our team there knows what the issue is, and part of it because they're physically in their facility.
Right.
They can see what they're doing, how they're using it. And so our challenge is to arm that person with a great supply chain behind the scenes, great sourcing capabilities that expand globally, great education opportunities to build their own skill set, because we're usually hiring inexperienced, and we bring that person in. And what they discover early on, in a perfect world, is they discover they're going to make some decisions and they're going to make some mistakes. And that's okay.
Yeah. A lot of people say that. A lot of CEOs say that. It's why do I get the sense you actually believe it and do it? The make mistakes part.
I think customers react to when they see us make a mistake. They also see how we react to fix it, and people figure out that you become more agile because you're quicker to fix something you break. If I make a decision and it breaks something, sometimes it's Florness's problem. Florness screwed this up. If I make that mistake in Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's my problem to fix.
Right.
And I own that. And I think our customers see that, and they want to associate with people that are willing to make a mistake, but are willing to learn from that mistake and also fix it.
Yeah, we used to. Fred Smith was one of my mentors when I was at FedEx, and that we used to give drivers so much leeway. It's like if there was a problem, they could go around things and purchase things, and almost like Ritz-Carlton does, just like, hey, let's just make it right. And I haven't seen that too much with the distribution company. If you look at Amazon or something, it's and some of your competitors who are it's about margin, it's about speed, it's about logistics, but you've also got a heart in this as well. But the other thing you just touched on is you just said you hire inexperience. Tell me about that, Dan. I don't hear that very often.
In a perfect world, we're hiring a future full-timer. That's a nice way of saying we go into 4-year state colleges, we go into 2-year technical colleges, and we find people with 1 year or 2 years left of school and say, hey, why don't you come and work for us part-time? And we open some doors, and people join, and we find that we get folks that are in industrial majors. We get folks that aren't in industrial majors, but they like the organization and they get exposed to a different way of thinking and a different mindset. And we say to them, come work part-time. Let's date before we get married.
Yeah.
And then when they join, we believe our prospects of that person staying around are greater than if you just hire somebody after a couple interviews.
I love
And
that.
so we start pouring training into people, and we've created our own corporate university 25 years ago, Fastenal School of Business, and we challenge every full-time employee, hey, in the next 12 months, between online courses and in-person courses and virtual courses, do 30 hours worth of training in the next 12 months. Figure out what it is that you need in your career to be successful. If you're a part-time, maybe the local leader is counseling that person to say, hey, figure out 15 hours of training that you can do in the next 12 months that's meaningful, and keep building your skill sets.
Yeah, and you have 23,000 employees now, so obviously that's working. I mean, Walmart, biggest corporation in the planet, universe, I guess. They've been doing this for a while. You can come in at entry level and come a man. Well, they had to because they're like the size of the government. You didn't have to do this. This was part of your DNA early on. This was part of the founding DNA, and that led to you guys building a school, university. Is that mostly for leadership training, or what do you guys do there?
Well, it started out a lot more as product training. And if I think back to the early years, and then it expanded into our new general managers in a branch. There was a boot camp for them. And then our new district managers, they would have 3 weeks worth of training, and it'd be spread out over the year. It wouldn't be just 3 weeks, subsequent, continuous, but it's centered on developing a plan for top line. So how are you going to grow your business? The second piece was developing a plan for recruiting. How are you going to build the team? How are you going to find the team to be part of that business? And then the last one was finance training. In other words, how are you going to manage that business to pay yourself? Because we have incentive comp programs for all of our employees. And if you're the district manager if you step into a new district and it's doing, it's back in the day, maybe $500,000-$600,000 a month.
Right.
And you want to grow that to $1 million a month. Now our average district manager does between $2 and $3 million a month. But if you want to grow that business, what's your plan to grow it? What's your recruiting plan? What schools are you gonna engage with, and why? And then again, how do you manage the P&L and the asset side, generate the cash flow to support you, your business, and this organization that wants to grow?
Yeah, it sounds powerful. $2 to $3 million a month per branch manager. That was like your total revenue as a company when you joined. That's
yeah, we were a little bit bigger than that when I joined, because I joined in the mid-90s.
Okay, all right.
$200 million.
All right,
but if you think back to the late 70s, the company was a $2 to $3 million a year company. When we went public, we were about a $20 million a year company. And when I joined,
10 branches, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when I joined some years later, we were a $200 million company.
So you get them to focus on growth, my favorite subject, recruiting, and obviously knowing how to run a P&L, pay yourself. What out of this distributed, I'll just call it an entrepreneurial model. Let's talk about entrepreneurial innovation. What bubbles up, and what things of these, have the front line created?
Yeah. So first off, we've in our 50 plus year history, we're 99% organic grower. And that means all of our folks operate on the same computer system. Even though we come from different places around the planet, we speak the same language when it comes to industrial supply. This part is part number 1, 2, 3.
That's rare.
No matter where you are.
Yeah, Europe's usually got a different system. That's amazing.
Yeah, we have very rich reporting systems as far as speed. So every morning, sometime between 5 and 5:30 in the morning, I'll get an email that has our sales around the globe for the prior calendar day.
Yeah,
and all of our leaders in the organization get their version of that email. If I'm in a branch, I get my local sales. If I'm in a district, I get my district sales. If I'm in a region, I get my regional sales. So very quick reporting. And that means we also see success pretty quickly. And we try to understand what that success is, what's causing it. And we might reach out to that person. We might try to study what they're selling, who they're selling to, and share that with 240 of their closest friends.
Yep. I can see getting a call from you, and I'm one of the branch managers in India, and it's 10 o'clock over there, but it's still pretty early over here. Like, Dan's on the phone, wants to know what the heck's going on over here.
Our founder was known for doing that.
Yeah.
He would call in the early years. He'd call any branch that did $5,000 in revenue the day before.
Ring the bell.
He'd call them up, and it'd be a quick, 10, 15 second conversation. He just asked them, "Hey, what happened yesterday?"
It means a lot. As you know, Sam Walton used to show up in stores in his pickup truck, and sometimes those visits were not very positive. But
yeah,
I like the way you balance a little bit of both. You just throw out stats, by the way, and I'm trying not to miss any of them. But you said your growth has been 99% organic, so there goes my acquisitions question, I guess.
We've done some acquisitions though.
Yeah. What? How do you balance that? How do you look at the we call it the build, buy, borrow matrix? Like how do you figure out what should we actually partner with, which is the borrow side or acquire versus like, hey, we can do this ourselves.
So our first acquisition came when we opened our second branch. When we opened up, we started in Winona, Minnesota. Our second branch was in Rochester, Minnesota, about an hour west of here.
Talking about 68, 69, 70 here.
Yeah, and it left such a positive impression on our founder that our second acquisition was 30 years later. I think what he learned was it was a lot of work and distraction, and you usually had some surprises with that. And maybe you're better off to just open a business and start doing business your way. And so that's essentially what we did for 30 years. And then as in the 90s. One of the reinvents we were going through is we were expanding our product lines. Again, some of that product line expansion came from our local teams finding success with their customer. And but then we were looking at, we bought a small machining operation when we stepped into metalworking. We bought a small janitorial supply business when we stepped into the janitorial product lines.
Right.
And and what we were really after is acquiring this business, does it buy us 3 or 4 or 5 years of knowledge to move faster?
Yep.
And then a bunch of our product lines we expanded organically. So we did that a number of times, and with limited success. It helped, but sometimes it was more distraction than help. Yep. As we stepped into the 2000s, we did a few acquisitions that centered on some manufacturing capabilities. It was technology we were not familiar with. We'd been a machine shop. We'd never done cold heading. We acquired a couple cold headers just to understand that business. And now we operate a pretty sizable cold heading business.
Yeah, huge factory.
Yeah.
So it sounds like if you have two choices on M&A, there's, PLM, product roadmap, product line management. So it's the product roadmap stuff, and there's distribution stuff. On the distribution stuff, acquiring geographies, it's just too different of cultures to buy up these little guys. But on the product line side, it sounds like you made some good bets there. We'll jump into the future in a second because I'm really curious about, how do you double the size of this company? Because looking in your eyes, you look like you're going to do it. Those of you that aren't on the video feed, he looks pretty serious about this. But my question first before that is, let's talk about the global market. The United States isn't the fastest growing economy in the world. So if you look at India, even China, India, a safer haven, I think, for American businesses to expand. What are you excited about over there?
So I was just in China here earlier in the month, and I hadn't been there for a few years because of COVID, but I had a chance to go celebrate. We've been in China now we celebrated being there 20 years. So we celebrated that with our team. Some things that jumped out at me is we're big at recognizing tenure, and so in this organization that has a couple hundred employees, we had over 50 employees that were recognized for tenure.
Very low churn. So wow.
5-year, 10-year, 15-year. We had one 20-year employee. And when I think back to the size of our organization when they joined, because we didn't have 200 people back then, we've retained an incredible percentage of people. And I think they found an organization they like being part of. And when I visited one of our branches south, I was in Shanghai. When I visited one of our branches south of Shanghai, I met the team. First off, I think it's a little awkward for them to engage with me because English is not their first language. They're able to speak English, but it's not their first language, and sometimes they're self-conscious about their ability to speak to me directly, and you figure out ways to engage with them and draw it out.
Yeah,
But
and you're a
it's
little, you're the CEO by title, so it's a little intimidating.
intimidating. But you find people that they're no different than somebody we'd find in Wisconsin or in Missouri or in anywhere in North America. They're people looking for an opportunity. They're good, honest, hardworking. They're willing to learn. They're willing to change, and they're service minded for the customer. It doesn't matter what language you speak or what geography, what culture you come from. Some things are universal,
Right.
and you find that wherever we go. I kidded with, I was in Northern Italy a couple of years ago, and I kidded with the team. I said, other than the fact you have a different accent, you're like a group of friends of mine from back in Wisconsin.
Exactly.
You know how to work hard.
Yeah, there's a lot of
And
Italian.
you enjoy
There's a
doing
lot
it.
of Italian towns too up there.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a totally different culture, different sales environment, very different from in India or China, which is more, rapid movement and scale versus a lot of the European ones are relationship, I guess. So when you look at the, China and India, is that a big part of future growth plans?
Yeah. So our presence in India is limited to, we have a large technology center in Bangalore,
Oh,
and we
nice.
have and we do some sourcing out of India, and we're now exploring
Smart.
opening up branch operation in the future. It's a complicated place to be.
It is.
It very similar. Brazil is a complicated place to be, but they're great big opportunities. So you figure out, every place is complicated in its own way. So you figure that out.
Yep.
In China, as I mentioned, we've been there closer to 20 years. So it's still a relatively small piece of our business, but we found great people, and we're growing it.
Yeah.
And so outside of North America, we're about a $200 million a year business of our $7 billion in revenue. And that 200 million, about 3/4 of that would be in Europe or Northern Europe, and about 1/4 of that would be in China and South Asia.
Yeah, and everyone that knows me is like, to me, I flip it and say that is a massive growth opportunity. It's like,
It is.
you
It is
guys
massive.
are like babies over there, which is great. And competition aside, I think your can-do culture and your entrepreneurial, let's just focus on the customer and P&L, the local branch is, I think it's a winning mix. So of course, it's a different culture and all that stuff as well. Another thing that I heard really spurred your growth. So, rear view mirror stuff here. It seemed like COVID was a good acceleration for you because you were, like Granger, you were already pretty focused on e-com and figuring out how to make that a part of your DNA. Talk about how much e-com has accelerated as a part of e-commerce for those of you that aren't geeks like me. But
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll flip that question slightly.
Please.
In that we talk about internally, we talk about our digital footprint, and back about 15 years ago, we started dabbling in something called vending. And if you really wanted to go back on history, but we don't have time to cover it, the original idea for Fastenal back in 1967 was to be a vending company selling nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
And but we learned quickly that people wanted to buy a lot of stuff that didn't fit in Bob Curlin's vending machine. So we went to Plan B, and that's what Fastenal is, Plan B. And 40 years later, we had a customer that asked us about vending. We didn't think it was a particularly great idea, but we respected the customer's wish, and we tried to solve their question. And we deployed some vending, and we studied the heck out of it, and we saw something special here. If the economics of the vending could improve. And we started searching for different vending organizations to provide vending equipment to us that dovetailed in with our supply chain. And we thought about it as, we're taking a shelf out of our branch, we're wrapping it in a metal box, and we're placing that shelf inside the customer's facility.
Right.
What should be in it?
Some people have followed you doing it. Yeah. By the way, those of you listening in, we're not talking about candy machines. You can get gloves or parts or supplies, whatever that particular company needs is stocked in there.
Yeah. Our number one machine in our fleet is that Helix candy machine, but you're right. We're putting gloves and batteries and safety glasses and other articles in it. what you
Lead
find
with candy.
it,
I love that. I'm going to use this as a strategy.
yeah. And what we found is using that device, scale had been brought to production 40, 50 years ago. And so the devices were very cost effective, whereas most of industrial supply was an engineered device that was just frankly too expensive
Yeah, sure.
of a shelf for that product. And so today we have 110,000 plus devices deployed in 25 countries.
Wow.
And it's about it's approaching 25% of our revenue.
And you get
On top
do you get immediate feeds on what's being pulled, so it's all coming into your daily reports?
Yep. Yeah, it's an internet appliance that's talking to a centralized system, so it's pinging all the time.
Brilliant.
It tells us when it's hungry, it tells us who came and received what at what time, and we can gain a lot of insight. And a lot of that insight really serves to make it a better supply chain to the customer. And what our customers typically see is their consumption of those items drops dramatically, 20, 25%, because the hoarding and the waste goes away.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you have, an employee that costs you, pick a number, $60, $70 an hour. Instead of spending 15 minutes to go get an $8 item, they're spending 15 seconds to go get an $8 item.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And it's out at point of use. And so over time, we added adjacencies to that vending. So about 41% of our revenue now is going through some type of Fastenal managed inventory technology, either device or environment. And when I say environment, about 14% of that is where we're going out and scanning bins.
Yeah.
For fasteners, for example.
And you're restocking.
And then,
you're restocking them right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if I add e-commerce on top of that, about 55% of our revenue now is going through that ecosystem. We think that ultimately that grows to about 65, maybe 70% of our revenue.
Wow, that's a huge margin improvement too.
Yeah, and you look at it from the customer's perspective. If you're buying something with repetition, why am I ordering it? Why doesn't it just appear? And then we can really talk to the customer about what they're using, when they're using it. Maybe there's alternative products. Maybe there's, in some cases, we'll come to a customer and say, this item, you're using too many of them. We had a customer a few years ago. We came to him and said, the cut resistance on your glove is too low.
Right.
You're using too many. Yeah. We suggested a more expensive glove, and we saved them $100,000 a year in gloves.
Sounds like my house. Go through a lot of gloves in the workshop. Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, most suppliers would never bring that up, but you brought it up as a solution to, hey, we can obviously design, build, or just bring a better product. I love that concept. It's like, why are you ordering it? Just let us take care of this for you. So when you get most excited about the future of the business, I'm going to take a bet that you probably want to be a $15 billion business someday. What are you most excited about getting there and making that happen?
The biggest thing is we sell into we've been in the North American market for 50 plus years. We still have a relatively small market share, and outside of North America, we can't even measure our market share. Yeah. So what gets excited is we think we have a really good value proposition for the marketplace, and there's an incredible amount of potential out there for us to keep going after. And our reinventing will be, as we add product lines, as we enter new geographies, because the distribution web in North America is different than the web we'll have in China or in India or even in Europe, because the public infrastructure is different. And so you figure out, because we move most of our own product on our own trucks in North America. That's less the case when I look at our European business, because it just isn't big enough yet.
Right.
We don't have the scale to do it. But you keep reinventing yourself as you approach those new environments. But the market exists for us to keep going after.
Yeah, and an interesting trend is, as you know, most of these large corporations or even small manufacturers, they want to buy more products from less companies, and you guys are right there in their sweet spot, whether or not they have a vending machine. I love that. Dan, really want to thank you for being on today. What any personal Reboot story that you went through that you might want to share?
I remember when I stepped into this role. So I've been with Fastenal. I'm in my 28th year.
Yep.
And 19 years in, I stepped in. I joined as the chief financial officer back in the mid 90s. For all intent and purposes, for our first 30 years, Bob Curlin was our our founder, our CEO, our CFO, and when we were expanding internationally and our growth profile had changed, Bob decided it's time to bring in a CFO. So Bob reached out to me and hired me, and because I knew Bob, and so I joined, and that was my role. Although I touched on some operation, I led part of our manufacturing division. I led part of our national accounts group for a period of time, product development.
Good cross.
And so I learned a bunch of new things besides just counting the beans. But when I stepped into the role, you really had to take a look at yourself and understand what do you need to change to, what do you need to learn to support this. And we actually created a course in our School of Business, a leadership development course that we've now, our 500 most senior leaders have taken this course. And what we did is we reached out to a bunch of successful leaders in Fastenal. And the leader of our School of Business is very methodical how he approaches things. He interviewed all of them to really discover how did they find success. And we boiled it down to 24 leadership competencies that summarize into 5 categories. The first one was all about to be a successful leader. What are you doing every day to develop yourself? What do you read? How do you learn? What do you do? What's your plan to develop yourself so you're relevant to your customer and to your team?
All right.
The second thing is, as a leader, what are you doing every day to develop your team? Because if you're making all the decisions, you're the limiting factor. If everybody is making decisions, you can react and grow faster. So the first 2 steps: develop yourself, develop others. And then the final 3 was what we call DAC: direction, alignment, and commitment. How do you convey direction to your team? How do you align your resources to support that direction? And how do you demonstrate commitment that this isn't just the idea of the month? And we've really engaged with our folks of, if we want to attract the best talent, part of it is, what are you doing every day to invest in them? Because if they're growing and learning and finding opportunity and being challenged and getting out of their comfort zone a lot, I think they're going to want to stay. And I think customers want to partner with them.
I like that.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, very thoughtful. Appreciate it. We might have to include some of that content in our MBA class coming up here. Might ask you for some slides. Dan, thanks.
We have a book on the topic.
Absolutely. Dan, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on. You've been listening to Dan Florness, who's the CEO of Fortune 500 leader Fastenal. Really cool company. Check them out. And we will see you soon. This is Dean Tobias with the Reboot Chronicles. Thanks for joining us today.